Welcome to Live from the Future, where we explore frontier tech that will change the world. My name is Wiz, and you can find me on Twitter at whimsicalwiz. Unfortunately, Elon Musk could not make it today, but in his place, we've got Matt Hartman from Betaworks to talk about the future of audio. Matt Hartman is a partner at Betaworks. Betaworks invests in companies that change the way that we communicate, such as Giphy, Anchor, Gimlet, Bitly, Medium, GroupMe, Venmo, Twitter, Kickstarter, and Tumblr. Great list of companies. Prior to joining Betaworks, Matt built ReferBoost, which was licensed to apartments.com. He was also at Hot Potato, which was acquired by Facebook. And he began his career by building the technology platform for Trammell Crow Company, which is acquired by CBRE. And he's also the inventor of a patent related to the protection of digital images. Matt, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a moment and teleport to the future together. You ready?
I'm ready. It's like Wayne's World.
It is now 2030, 10 years from now. Can you paint me a picture of how audio shows up in our daily lives that's different from today?
Sure. So I think my vision for 2030 is that audio shows up almost in a way that it doesn't show up. It's present, but not visible.
Okay.
And so I think about what seamless computing could look like. So we have operating systems that we're used to using today, right?
Yep.
So we have our computer operating system, we have our phones which have an operating system. Right now we have a very clunky voice operating system, right? We can kind of ask some voice assistance questions. There's this metaphor of a voice assistant to start with.
Yep.
I think what's going to change is that we're going to we will meet in the middle. So we'll adapt how we speak to computers verbally to conform with the way that they understand. But I think that the computers will also conform to how we operate. And so the way that I envision my life is I'm asking questions that I would normally ask of my phone or of my computer and having interactions, whether it's interactions over email or having interactions over the web, surfing the web. I'll be able to have those using my voice and speak them into the ether. And the responses I will get back will be in the medium that makes sense. So I'm sitting at home, might be a visual response because I have my TV right there.
Yep.
If I'm sitting in my car, assuming I'm driving it, I'm guessing it's going to be self-driving at that point.
Probably other people in the car too.
Right, other people in the car too. So I think it's going to be a as unobvious voice interfaces will be as unobvious as the fact that when we use iPhones with apps, there's no file system like there was when we used Windows, right? Yeah. We had these metaphors moving from the
clunkiest of metaphors now in retrospect.
Right. Yeah. So clunky to be like, okay, people have desks. Let's use that as a metaphor. So it's a desktop, right? But then when it moved to mobile, it didn't have files. It had apps, and that was kind of a new metaphor. And then we moved, we were talking earlier, Snapchat is such an interesting example to me because Snapchat did away with buttons.
Yeah.
It's just you swipe and then you tap it and a text box comes up. And now we don't talk about Snapchat as an app that doesn't have buttons. It's just an app that is made natively for your phone. And I think where we are today is we have these sort of metaphors that still feel very present. And in 10 years from now, 2030, it's going to be as invisible as the air.
I think that great painting of the future, and that's kind of what I envision as well. The two hurdles that come to mind for me when we think about going there, and we can come back to the present day and talk about these topics. Two hurdles. One is the always listening, right? For your voice assistant to be able to pick up on just like you being able to naturally like say blah, blah, blah. One is we're going to be really comfortable with always listening, which I think is probably not a stretch. Like today, I think it's a massive stretch because of all the privacy things that have come up. But in the future, you can imagine a world in which we're more comfortable with that.
Or where maybe the privacy looks different.
Yes.
Right? Maybe right now, some of the processing happens locally, some of the processing happens in the cloud. But you can imagine having cochlear implants that are so tiny and also have more processing power than the GPUs that are big today.
Yeah.
Right. And so then the math changes and maybe you can do lots of things locally.
And people understand that it's processed locally and Amazon's never listening to it and blah, blah, blah. That makes sense to me. The other big hurdle is the permission for the assistant to interrupt you, right? Like today, the new AirPods have a feature where like it'll auto read text messages that come into you. And I've turned it off now because it's annoying if you're like listening to a podcast and it's like Matt Hartman just texted you and starts like reading the text message. I think that's the other big hurdle of how to do that quietly and like seamlessly where like you're cool with it and like it isn't actually too interruptive. Any idea on what those two things look like? I mean, one, it sounds like privacy will get us over the always listening. And do you agree that always listening is a part of that future? Like today it's, hey Siri, blah, 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 and then Siri listens. In the future, where we're able to have this voice as an interface, it feels like part of the hurdle will have to be that it's always listening and just like waiting for intent things where like, oh, I think that Matt's talking to me and I'm going to jump in with this.
I agree with you that always listening, and I would even expand what the definition of listening is. So we have listening to what you're saying.
Yeah.
But we also have, we're really describing as context.
Yes, listening within context.
And the context might be the words that are being said.
Yep.
It also might be where you are.
Time of day.
It might be time of day.
Yeah.
It might be, having access to your calendar or all of the conversations you've ever had with the person you're next to, or all the conversations you've ever had with the person who you're about to go be with.
Yep.
And so I think when I think in the same, and I think it has the same pros and cons, right? The context that Google has is often very useful. If you go try to do a web search on a browser, I was just talking to somebody about this, web search on a browser that has no context about who you are, the results are worse.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
And so on the one hand, you want the fast results because you want to get to the answer quickly. On the other hand, you want to have respect or understand or transparency around the data privacy issue. And so I actually think those are kind of separate. I agree with you. I have a hard time picturing a good voice audio operating system that lacks context.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That makes total sense to me. With the context, it can be much smarter in knowing when to chime in and what sort of information you're looking for as well. You sort of used voice and audio together in that sentence. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the future of audio today. Betaworks has done previously voice camp, and you've got an upcoming one, audio camp. How do you think about the distinction between the two? How do you think about the distinction between the two camps as well?
Yeah.
Speaking about Betaworks a bit.
So verbiage-wise, I had kind of started out thinking about voice as being part of voice computing.
Yep.
And as audio as being closer to podcasting. Sort of they started from two different places.
People consuming more audio now that they've got headphones glued into their ears.
Exactly.
And yeah.
But I almost think it's a distinction that I view that my future is a distinction without a difference. That it used to be that you might ask a question with voice. Right now, you ask Siri a question with voice, half the time it comes back and it gives you a link to click, right? Yeah. So that's just voice, right? There's no, in my view, you're not hearing anything.
Sure.
I think in a perfect world, we'd have those things be almost interchangeable. It's just whatever is the most convenient answer. For Betaworks ourselves, we spent about 5 years, or about 5 years ago, we started looking at the future of audio and the future of voice. And really, I viewed them as two different things. On the audio side, we started to see the resurgence of podcasts, a bunch of data showing that made us think that podcasts were going to have a resurgence. It was everything from battery life being greater to the cars we were under at that time 50% of cars were considered connected.
Yep.
To there was a last category. Oh, the cell phone coverage was getting much better.
Yep.
And so it's hard to remember now, but there was a time where when you're walking around, you're like, should I be listening to music or is that going to be my phone's going to be dead later?
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a
or it'll use all my data.
Or will use all my data. There's all this psychological friction, right?
Yep.
And so what that ultimately led to was podcasts moving to streaming. And so that was a big thesis for us. And then at the same time, Amazon introduced Alexa. So we thought when we first did our voice camp, we were thinking about those two themes.
Yep.
Today we think about, I think we asked ourselves, so we invested in Anchor and Gimlet. Spotify acquired both of those companies.
Yeah.
And we invested in a number of other companies.
We're using Anchor right now for this.
Oh, amazing. That's why it's so easy. And so the question we asked ourselves was, okay, so we've made a bunch of bets around the audio and voice space.
Yeah.
Do we think this is the end or is this the beginning? What are the things that we think are going to change in the next 5 years? And the conclusion we came to is there's a few opportunities. One was, and our audio camp really centers around what we call audio 3.0. The second wave of audio was what we did before.
Yep.
First wave being, you plug in your iPod.
Yep.
And everything's not streaming.
Download music's off of iTunes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sync it up and hopefully, and then in your podcasting from your garage. Second wave is what we invested in with Anchor and Gimlet with sort of streaming. The third wave for us is a few different things. One is, what are the new interfaces? And in particular, what does it mean for your AirPods to be always in? Right? So you have kind of always on, always in. And so that's one question. What does that mean in terms of voice computing?
Yep.
Second question we're asking is around context. We have all of this, there's all of this data now.
Yeah.
And that's both data that we are generating, but also data that's allowed us to create new voice type of assistants. If you look at the quality of synthetic voice has gotten very good, and we think is going to get even better, which means that you can then have more customized responses. Right now, for example, I think it's tough to listen to Siri read out an article for 2 minutes, right? It's like it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
But if synthetic voice is better, then we can have that kind of a thing. It's really a podcast just for you, right?
Totally.
And answer questions just for you. So that's the second thing. And then the third is evolutions on the monetization side of audio. And that's right now there's a bunch of experiments being done around paid, advertising is kind of how it started. There's paid content. I think Headspace is an interesting company to think about. It wouldn't work as a podcast. It only works because it's an app. Because if it was a podcast, it would A, have to be free.
Yep.
And B, it would have to have ads. I don't know how you put ads in a meditation app.
Yeah, it'd be terrible.
Right? So that's kind of the third piece of it, where they said people are paying for audio. They're paying for audiobooks. They're paying for audio meditation. They're paying for music. And so it's interesting to see audio really emerge as a big category within the App Store as a monetizable category.
Let's talk about the social piece of that. I think there's some interesting native components of audio that actually make it pretty well suited to social beyond what we're doing today. I was listening to a podcast this morning with Daniel Ek, who's the CEO at Spotify. Biased, obviously, but he was talking about the richness of audio, how when you've got your AirPods in and you're running down the street, but are in a meeting at the same time, you do have that feeling of presence because you can hear people and you don't have the video sort of like breaking the third wall, right? It's like the video sort of like breaks the illusion because you're like looking at a screen and it's like, oh, there's Matt. But if all you have is AirPods in, like your imagination's open, right? So there is some richness of presence that's actually different than if you're in video. I think there's also some richness in fidelity versus something like Instagram. Like Instagram's like broadcast, right? It's like I take a picture and it's like, look at my life. And like no one actually like interacts with it. Like they see it, but it's not really social. Voice is you're sharing. You can share way more than a picture. If someone's replying, you're getting a lot back. I think there's an opportunity there. What do you think that it looks like? I know that
I'd kind of separate out those two parts.
Okay,
so you have
sure.
the how does it feel to be broadcasted to?
Yeah.
And then what are the dynamics of if you have user-generated responses?
Yes.
So on the how it feels to get broadcasted to, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I remember hearing Ira Glass describe, it was before we invested in Gimlet, it was probably in 2013 or so, where he described what it felt like to have someone talking in your ear. Right? The relationship you have with the person who feels like they're in your head.
Totally.
I think it's fundamentally different. So I think there's these opportunities to really, I think it creates trust. I think your Instagram point is an interesting one where Instagram is such a curated experience, right? This is the highlight reel.
I mean, it's very one way. Like you get some engagement back, like likes, but it's just like, it's broadcast to like a giant list. Audio, like it's me and you talking. Like that's way more intimate.
Well, for us, it's talking, but for the people who are going to be listening to your podcast, it's not, right? It's still broadcast. But what they get is not just the highlights. They get the deep conversation, especially just how audio and podcast formats have been, which tend to be
as if they're sitting here.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, they're part of the conversation.
Yeah,
right? It feels like you're part of the conversation, and it feels in a way like a real conversation.
Yes,
which I think is kind of what you're getting at with the Instagram kind of very curated thing.
Yes.
However, I think there is a downside that no one has cracked yet, which is on the responses. People have described audio. It took me a while to really conceptualize, but people describe audio as linear.
Okay.
And the best way I understand it is if I show you 10 images,
yes,
you can look at all 10 images at once and pick the one you want.
Yes.
But if I wanted to give you a list of 10 choices,
yes,
like the IVR, you're going to call up here, press 1 for X, press 2 for Y.
Yeah.
Right? It's a linear. You have to wait.
You have to listen to every single one.
And there's something that I think makes it difficult because of that. I wonder if you think about the user-generated content, that original version of Anchor, where it was a lot of audio responses. I had one podcast. I had asked people a question: what was your first screen name? And everybody who signed up for Anchor, if they heard that, they'd add their own content, and it was so long. And the key to me is to understand. And with the screen name is maybe a bad example.
What was your first screen name?
Matt Hart 88.
Nice. Mine was the Mad Hatter.
The Mad Hatter. I was Mad Hart 88 because I played the piano, and piano is 88 keys.
Okay.
So it like had nothing to do with years, but everyone else does years. And so it was like...
Not because you're 30.
Which I'm not.
Yeah.
I was born in 82. And so, and it didn't occur to me when I was, 12 and making my first screen name.
People would think of that in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I always kept that. So you make your screen, I think your screen name is sort of a function of what era you got a screen name.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the reason I bring that up is that the responses, let's say one is good and one is like, let's say you ask a question to your listeners and they all give you audio responses, and like there's 5 good one great one, 5 ones that are kind of interesting, and then a few that are like really drone on.
Sure.
How do you surface the order of those responses? So you have to think about sort of does whatever the platform is give you the ability to say, look, here's a featured response?
Yeah.
Or do they say, okay, it's in time order? Or do they say, if people fast forwarded through this, is that a data point that we can use to say, okay, this one's not as good? And if people listen to the whole thing, or is there liking? So the fact that you can the comment on Instagram or on Reddit where you can upvote gives you actually the much quicker ability to be able to scan through comments. Okay, this person just did a bunch of emojis. Comment. Okay, that one's a long one that looks like a rant. Okay, this one's from somebody I know. I want to listen. I want to read that one.
Yeah.
How do you create that experience when you don't have a visual interface? So I think that's a question that people are actively trying to figure out on the audio side in the social sphere.
That makes sense for asynchronous. What about synchronous? Do you think that there's a world in which we've got synchronous social applications? Like one I was reading about yesterday that was actually pretty interesting was what they call teleportation. So you're at the office, your family's at home, you want to like drop in and say hi. You connect to like your Apple HomeBot and you're like, hey guys, like how's everyone doing? And like whatever, right? That's an easy one. That makes sense. There's apps like TTYL that have tried to do like a phone hangout with a bunch of people on it. I don't know how successful they've been at it, but it's a cool concept. Do you have any thoughts on what a social third place could look like that's like always on in the future? And would that be just audio or would it be totally seamless? Or like what would that look like?
So I still think about it in the context of quality, but I think that quality is multiplied by you have quality of broadcast content, right? So you're using really good microphones, so you have high quality, right?
Yeah.
You have quality of conversation, right? And then you also have quality of how close do I know that person? How close is that person to me? So my cousin posting a picture of her baby, even if it's a bad picture, is very high quality to me.
Yeah.
Right? Much higher quality than, I don't know, Kim Kardashian's very, very like high quality, professionally shot photo.
Sure.
And I mean, I don't know. I should probably just post a selfie too.
Yeah.
But so to me, in your example, what I picture in the future is probably as varied an experience as what we get on social networks today. So we have Facebook, which serves purpose X, Instagram, which serves purpose Y, Snapchat, which is just quick responses.
Okay.
And I think it is probably not a one-to-one mapping of this is the Instagram for, I thought of Anchor as the Twitter for audio, but they thought of themselves as the YouTube for audio, which is only a slight difference. But when you think about the dynamics of YouTube and the number of people who post and then get responses and the value proposition, it is much closer to YouTube.
Yeah.
And so I think there's going to be design constraints that allow us to have a really different kind of experience than just text. Like, and an example is the ephemerality. I think ephemerality for Snapchat works really well in terms of what it does to your psychology and allows you to do what I think of as really photo messaging. It's a photo message because I send you a text. How many times have you gone back and looked at an old text you sent to someone? It's very rare that you like So, I mean, you might scroll up because they have a link in there, but you don't care what they said.
Yeah.
Whereas with a photo, you're like, oh, I'm posting this photo to Instagram.
Yeah.
Posting a photo is really different than sending your friend a snap.
Totally.
And so I think there's that. I don't know what that dynamic looks like in audio. I think there will be a real-time version of that, to your point, which is me logging on and having my AIM experience. And then you have your sort of, I'm going to make a note for myself, and this is really helpful. And I think the better that voice recognition gets for transcription, the more searchable it is. Like discovery goes hand in hand in what works with posting. So the discovery side will help dictate what the social side is.
Got it. Yeah, no, I like that idea of sort of different places and different use cases, and quality of interaction being one of the lenses. Like I can imagine that the HomePod example, like the quality of the interaction is maximum, right? That's you going into your family. That's like the most people you want to talk to. Whereas you could imagine a TTL chat room that you just drop in and like bullshit for like 5 minutes and then drop out, right? And those experiences exist today. You can extrapolate that out to what that looks like in an audio future. Like it's not one thing that we're going to join as a third place. Like it's different rooms for different uses with different experiences is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I mean, I think 10 years, the 2030 version of this is if you get into your car and you are in your mobile thing.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And and you are done with your email and so you don't need to be productive or your humane tech app tells you, you've been doing a lot of work. You should take a break.
Yeah.
Right. All of that context might say, I think it's time for you to connect with the 5 people who you've said, when I have time, I need to keep connecting with. And we're going to ping them and see if they're available. Hey, by the way, your friends or your close friend is available. And so want to chat with them? And you're like, yeah, actually, I would like to chat with them. And then it kind of creates that serendipity is a function of context, right?
Yeah.
And so it could create that kind of a situation. But I think that your perception of availability or whether you want to be in the app changes with who's in the app. Saying I'm online to the world, message me is different than saying just to your family, hey, I'm online. Do you happen to be home?
Yeah. Don't
even give them that ability to say to do the what'd you call it? The teleportation.
Yes.
Only makes sense if there's somebody on the other side.
Yeah. Totally.
Right? So the context matters.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense to me. We chatted a bit about always plugged in, always on with AirPods today. I'm a big fan of the new AirPods.
Will you tell me why you like them?
Mostly because they fit in my ear now. The previous ones didn't, so I wasn't able to use them. Now they fit in my ear, and I get to experience the AirPod world. I guess what I've been thinking a lot about is, and we talked about this before we were recording, is sort of like platforms, right? Some people talk about always plugged in potentially being a platform of the future. You've written previously about on-demand interfaces, how apps of today, the expectation isn't just one interface. It's that, you can access Uber through Facebook Messenger bot on your watch, but also on your phone, whatever. I think there's natural voice extensions of that where you can imagine saying like, hey Siri, get me an Uber to home, right? And phone knows that I'm here. Uber knows where home is. And like, that's all that's needed. What I'm less clear on, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, is what do AirPod first platform ideas look like where like they aren't possible today and they're not just a new interface. Like it's a whole new brain was the word that used in the article a long time ago.
Yeah.
Are there going to be brains that are created from audio first?
I don't know. I think potentially, I think those kinds of brains, what I was describing is in the multimodal context, which is really how I was starting to think about chatbots is one mode of communication.
Yep.
Audio is one mode of communication. And I think at the time I used the example of Foursquare where on the website, it's manifest. The data that Foursquare has collected is manifest as search because probably if you go to the website, you're searching. You're probably at your computer, not at a place.
Yep.
Versus when you open your phone, it's manifested as, hey, here's where you are. Want to check in? And it's the same data set, but it's a totally different question they're asking you because they know your context. And so I think your question is, as we move to audio first, is there a new data set that could be generated? Is that Because I think of it as...
Data set might be part of it, in that new business opportunities today are driven by the availability of large data sets, but are there also just like new opportunities for brand new businesses to exist that aren't just a new interface extension? Like Uber launching an AirPods first app is just a new interface of something that already exists. Are there going to be new businesses, new opportunities for you to invest in the next multi-billion-dollar whatever because of AirPods as a platform?
Interesting. I mean, our answer is yes. That's why we're looking at this category.
Okay.
I think there's a few ways to come at it. One is as a platform for attention.
Okay.
You're finding a lot more attention.
Yep.
And so there is a bunch of... I wonder, here's a question.
Okay.
You go buy your cup of coffee. You sit down right before you get your cup of coffee. You look at your phone, and every app is competing with every other app. You're waiting 2 minutes for coffee. So you've got like, do I play a game? Do I send a text message? Do I check my email? Do I send a Snapchat? Oh, I have a notification for something else. Should I go look at that? And then how am I going to spend these 2 minutes?
Yep.
When you get your cup of coffee and put in your AirPods and walk the rest of the way to work, what competes? So you have a phone call.
Yep.
You have podcast.
Yep.
Music, audiobook.
Yep.
That's kind of it right now.
Yep.
Right? And so my question is, imagine a fifth product. You brought up TTYL before.
Sure.
Imagine you have TTYL. Do you, or imagine an actual assistant that says, hey, I'm going to tell you about your day. That's like the example everybody uses, right? Because it's the only thing we can think of right now.
Yeah.
It's almost certainly not going to be that.
I have some good ideas, actually.
Okay. So, I mean, I'd love to hear that. My question with those ideas is, are they higher up or lower down in the attention stack or the desire stack of a podcast? Because right now it's, I already have now my podcast. So 4 years ago, you told me about a podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll subscribe. Now I'm like, well, I have a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
Right? What are the new kinds of products? So tell me, what are you can't tell them to the world?
No. The biggest one that comes to mind of like what could be truly new and only exist in this world is one of the points in Homo Deus, Yuval Harari. He talks about, the whole point of like Deus is that we're going to become more godlike. A big part of that is substituting parts of our consciousness to machines. So one easy example is like knowledge or memory. Like you can imagine a world in which like you walk in and because of the context that my phone knows that I'm meeting with you and blah, 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 Siri announces in my ear, like, this is Matt Hartman from Betaworks, blah, 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 before you walk in, just to like give me that like da-da-da. Or like I walk into a party and like I recognize someone's name, but like I don't remember what they do. And I'm like, hey Siri, tell me about Ben John. Great fake name. And it comes to me. Or like an even crazier futuristic example, we're standing in the kitchen, we're chatting, my AirPods are in, or my Cochlear implant, always listening. And you mentioned some esoteric artist that I've never heard of, right? And like Siri picks up on me sort of like pausing and like not knowing what it is. And then like whispers in my ear, like artist ABC is like blah, 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 blah. But it creates an opportunity to have extension of either your knowledge, which today we do by Googling, so without having to look at the screen, but also coming to us, or memory, supplementing your memory. And like, the Rolodex is like an easy example that we've seen in like Star Trek and whatever. There's probably better memory examples as well, where now it takes some of that load off of you and becomes an extension of you.
I mean, how many phone numbers do you know?
None.
Right, because
my dad's.
Right, your phone has abstracted that. Those are basically now IP addresses.
Totally, and that space has been open for other things. You can imagine a lot more being abstracted to a computer that's able to know those things way better than us and bring them to us when we need them. That's something I could see audio first.
I think the question,
maybe with a bit of Apple Watch, where like instead of it, like you say the artist name and like it vibrates on my wrist and like I just like discreetly touch it and then it tells me while I'm still listening to you.
Right. So my question there is, and this is why I asked about data sets.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that what you're describing happens. The question is that a new company opportunity, or is that if you already have the data in the same way that if you have Uber, right? If you're Uber and what your job to be done is like take people from A to B.
Yep.
Google has that data. And so for them to add a multimodal interface, my question is it a hard enough problem that the actual problem isn't really about finding the data? That's become the commodity, but somehow deciding whether you need it or presenting it in a certain way becomes the key differentiator. And I don't know.
Seems like they're both very challenging problems.
Yeah.
We're talking about some crazy futuristic stuff. Super fun. Let me ask you, when you start looking into new spaces like audio or voice and start forming these 10-year visions, how do you go about that research? Like, what's your process?
So we start a few different ways. So sometimes we start introspectively, where we invest sort of when there are big changes on the frontier tech side. And we invest when there are big changes on the user behavior side as a result of frontier tech. So I'll give it might be easier to give you an example of things that we don't do.
Sure.
So blockchain came out. Bitcoin really came out. And we started seeing people build really interesting. We invest in the consumer layer, so we don't invest in financial tech. We thought, okay, this is interesting. It's a new technology. So are there consumer opportunities here? And we started to see people build on top of the blockchain. And then to the point, they were building on top of Bitcoin to the point where the community started to say, we're not really able to do everything we want to do on Bitcoin. Let's launch it. There should be a new thing, and a new platform came out called Ethereum.
Ether.
So then we started to say, okay, well, what are the kinds of behaviors that we can build on top of Ethereum? The conclusion we came to at the time was there's a bunch of intellectually interesting things, but are there things that people are going to use? So we start out by saying, this is intellectually interesting. And then we start to look at, for lack of a better word, retention. Right?
Okay.
You build an interesting product on there. Are people using them?
And this is the introspective, just thinking about.
That's actually more data driven, right? Initially, it's introspective, right? So another example, maybe that's equally as abstract, is Google Circles.
Sure.
When I learned about Google Circles, I was like, wow, this is intellectually interesting. Because the graph points in different directions. Twitter is one directional graph, so that is created news. Facebook's a bi-directional graph that really creates a friend graph. And now Google Circles is creating this new sort of new graph that hasn't existed, that might be a new graph.
Sure.
And create what are the emergent property of that graph? I think if you look at the use cases on top of Facebook and use cases on top of Twitter, you started to see very quickly that there was retention. But when you looked at Google Circles, it was harder to see, right? Intellectually interesting. Do people actually use it? I'm not sure.
Okay, let's go back to blockchain because it's a good example. It's a nascent technology that you probably didn't know much about 10 years ago. And it sounds like you're fairly well versed now. So part of it was looking at engagement and trying to understand, like, will consumers use this? What is the consumer use case? Are they using it? What did the rest of your research look like? Like, were you reading research papers, talking to founders? Like, how did you go about coming up to speed on that space?
So
where you can talk on a podcast intelligently about it?
So we did a few things.
Sure.
Actually, each of us at Betaworks does our research a little bit differently.
Okay. How do you do yours?
So I do mine primarily by coding. So I'll build something on the thing.
Okay.
To understand how it works.
Okay.
And so with Ethereum, I built a smart contract.
Nice. What did you do?
The first one we were betting on whether the value of, we had a bet internally at Betaworks about whether Bitcoin cash value would exceed Bitcoin value. And so we said, what a perfect bet to put on the blockchain.
Nice.
Right? All the things are identifiable on the blockchain. So I built an Ethereum contract.
So you made a gambling smart contract.
It's basically, what it was
I'm just kidding. No officials are going to see this.
No, it was just internal. So it was just for me to test it out. But on my local machine, I started to build a smart contract that said, when X happens, do Y. So I learned about what the structure was of a smart contract. I very quickly said, well, how am I going to figure out what the market cap is of each of these things? Well, we're going to have to decide. And then it turned out, so as I did my research, I found, okay, there's this notion of an oracle in blockchain where you say, okay, there's going to be certain things that you need to find an answer on. But you need to agree with all the parties need to agree what the oracle is. So for example, what if you and me agree that Bloomberg.com, whatever they say the price is, that's the market cap.
Okay.
Or we could say, let's pick these three, and when two of the three agree. So it started to be very clear at that moment that even though you're building something that is totally decentralized, often there are questions that come up that you require a central authority to give you the information about. And so that's sort of how I start to do my research. Then I talk to a bunch of founders about what the kinds of things, because I'm not coming up with the ideas, right? I have my own idea to sort of learn it. I did the same thing with Alexa. I built a skill. And I put that in the Alexa App Store. I actually did pretty well.
Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah. And so that one I learned both about how to deploy a skill, about user testing in a skill. As a firm at Betaworks, one of the things we do is we have developers all around. And so the reason even before I built my own skill, we do demos once a week.
Yep.
People saying, hey, here's what I hacked together.
Yep.
And we'll ask, what did you learn from that? And so they'll say, for example, in the case of the data scientist who was working on Bitly at the time,
sure,
said, I made this thing that tells you the news. Maybe it was Dig. He was like, it tells you the news via voice. And what I realized is there's no home screen. I got to figure out how to tell you what the options are.
Yeah.
So he said, that's interesting. Is that interesting enough to be able to learn something new? So we start to dig in.
Okay. So through experimentation, you're able to learn and unlock where the hurdles are going to be and where the challenges are going to be to give you good insight on that category.
Right. So we have working with developers and experimenting. And then we have, that's kind of, I would call that broadly product focus.
Got it.
And then we have market focus. So what are the dynamics of the industry?
Yep.
In the case, until Google Home came out, we weren't sure we were going to do one of our Betaworks camps around audio because we were concerned about platform risk with just Alexa. But then Google Home came out. And so we said, okay, now there's a little bit of a competitive dynamic between companies. And so that means that there's a better opportunity for a startup to get a little bit of traction. And then the third thing is broad market trends. So what are we seeing in the market? And that's where it comes to things like the cars are only halfway connected, battery life is increasing.
Yeah.
So we sort of take those three, and that's kind of how we'll come to it. Ultimately, though, when we dig into a category, we'll make a couple of investments. We want to see things working.
Got it.
We see people start to use products or something really start to take off. We'll say, wow, maybe there's a layer under here of more stuff that can get built.
Got it.
So that's the behavior side.
And it sounds like those things are happening in parallel. Like you're doing the research, starting to talk to companies, like maybe making an early investment before your mind is like fully around the space, but going through it as things go. Got it.
And in any time, there'll be 4 or 5 categories that we're looking at where they're in various stages of being of progression.
Let's talk about that. One of the challenges with frontier tech is timelines of the category, but also viability. I mean, people have been talking about VR since the 80s, right? And there was predictions back then that like everyone would have headsets by the 90s. Here we are, 2019, and we're still nowhere near close to that future. How do those timelines and uncertainties affect your investment strategy?
Yeah, so we'll look for external factors, right? So everybody's excited about it. There's new developer tools or there's a new consumer product. So when the Oculus came out, it's like, okay, now this is big companies are investing in this, which means there's potential for the market to adopt it. We don't know yet, right? And so now as we're seeing, the market is kind of adopted it only, right?
Yeah.
And so do we think there's a price point difference? Do we think that there's a user behavior weirdness around virtual reality? Maybe. So with VR, we spent a bunch of time, again, going in, understanding whether it's building something or trying different products, talking to founders in the category. My partner, Peter, was playing with this product called Rec Room.
Yep.
And we ended up investing in the company, partly because they had a couple of really specific product decisions they'd made.
I think it's one of your only VR
It's our only VR bet in the fund.
Right? So
how do we do that? So we when we invested in Rec Room, we thought that they were 2 things. One is they had people using the product and coming back, which was interesting, including ourselves. Secondly, the way they approached product was actually really similar to the way Anchor approached product and audio.
Yeah. They
had very nuanced points of view around what it should feel like to be in Rec Room. So what does it mean? They had to invent what it meant to throw something.
Yeah.
What does it mean if they had a product where you could have a glass on a table and you using the controller can slowly push the glass until it falls off the table. And the fact that they were thinking about it with that level of granularity was an early indicator for us that the product was going to feel really good for consumers, right? Then the question is, how big does it get? We did a lot of research around VR. Much of what we did ended up in us understanding how hard the assets are to create, what the user experience is like. We made an early investment in Rec Room that really started to work.
Yeah.
But then we also saw that the VR market wasn't expanding as quickly as a lot of the analysts had predicted. Rec Room was probably like the number 1 app across all of Steam when it launched. And so we were excited about that. At the same time, we took a lot of that research that we did and pointed it towards computer vision.
Yeah.
Because we started to see Apple say, Apple did an update, I think 2 years ago, that around AR, where now you had 300 plus million people who had ARKit.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? And will people use AR? So we started to look at that. And can some of the ecosystem that have been built around virtual reality get used in augmented reality? So we'd spend a lot of time there. We didn't have strong conviction around the consumer use case. There are some interesting B2B use cases. And so we started to make some investments around that. And so that's sort of how we've taken the approach. Really, the question we asked ourselves in AR was, what changed when the camera nose was looking
at? Got it. Cool. Let's switch to Quickfire Round, and we'll end on that. So these are 5 short questions, 15-second responses.
Okay.
And that'll be it for today. Book or movie that you've recently seen on Frontier Tech that you can't shut up about?
I'm late to the party, but I just watched Ex Machina.
Okay.
So that's one that I've been thinking a lot about, but I know that everyone else has probably already seen it.
It's fair. Top 3 audio startups that you've seen recently that you really like?
I'm seeing so many right now that
for Audio Camp.
So we're seeing a bunch of interesting stuff. Some of it's not launched yet, so I won't talk about those. Some products that are out there already that I think are interesting are companies that let you. I love the intersection of audio and productivity.
Okay.
So seeing some companies that are doing interesting things around podcast discovery.
Yep.
Companies that are doing interesting things around letting you take things that are not audio and convert them. So let me listen to this company update as an audio version as opposed to not. And then in general, I am fascinated by the synthetic voice, which I think enables a lot of this stuff.
Listen to these articles in Samuel L. Jackson's soothing voice.
Exactly. So I don't know if people would say that Samuel L. Jackson's voice is soothing, because I feel like it's a lot of curse words if you're going to do Samuel L. Jackson voice.
But he has like a good bedtime story voice.
But he did. I think. Companies like Resemble.ai are interesting. I think Descript just acquired Lyrebird, which is interesting to make an AI-powered podcast editing toolkit, which is interesting.
Descript, yes. Like if you said something weird, I could go and like change. Or if I said something weird,
yeah. So I mean, I think that finding those different applications is pretty interesting.
Cool.
That was longer than 15 seconds. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Number 1 frontier tech person that you think we should all be following on Twitter?
I think Peter Rojas is pretty good.
You said your name. It's cute. Last 2. Favorite part of being an investor?
Just getting to see so many new inventions all the time.
Cool. Least favorite part?
My meetings have to be short. I don't get to spend 2 hours talking at a first meeting. It might be 30 minutes. So it's a lot of quick conversations, and where I would love to spend 2 hours talking with each person about how they're thinking about their product. We have to kind of narrow it down. If it's not an investment, we probably have to.
And you just like insanely scheduled throughout the week, like meeting.
Yeah, the schedule is. I've tried to adjust it now, but I think the schedule's often 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, and that's I like spending time going deep and coding to try to understand something, or really digging deep into what's happening now with natural language generation. And it's hard to find that kind of 4 to 8 hour block unless I block it for myself.
Do you go back-to-back meetings? Is it hard to context switch between those? You take breaks in between? And now I'm taking this away from the Quickfire Round just because I'm interested.
Yeah, I change it up to try to experiment with new formats.
Yeah.
Right now, my format is leave my morning open so that the afternoon I can go, and the afternoon will be very heavily scheduled.
Yeah.
But that allows me to sort of be flexible in the morning if there's something I have to deal with. What I like to do is have if I do 2.5 hours of 30-minute chunks, that to me doesn't feel as much like context switching, because the context is all meeting with new companies. Because meeting with new companies is only part of the job. Part of it is working with our existing companies.
Yeah.
Part of it is learning about new categories. Part of it is working with our investors. And so there's a whole bunch of things that are not just
what would you say the split is there across those 3? And obviously, working with your investors changes as you're raising a new fund or whatever. But let's say that you're mid-fund, you don't have to worry about raising money from new LPs yet. What does that split look like across those 3?
Mid-fund, it's probably pretty close to balanced in terms of new companies and working with our existing portfolio companies to help them.
Okay.
I think as the fund matures, it becomes less about meeting new companies, more about working with the portfolio companies. But as portfolio companies graduate to Series A, Series B, we tend to spend most of our time with the early stage companies. Yeah. And then as we're raising funds, spend more time with investors. But we try to keep it, I at least try to keep it kind of even, because you spend a lot of time, let's say, pitching for the fund, but then you want to work with the LPs and understand, in our case, a lot of our investors are interested in the companies that we're working with and trying to help them find where they can work together, because we have a lot of strategic investors in our fund. And so that's it changes over time, but in a way it doesn't, right? It's not huge swings.
Cool. That's all I got for today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.